Alright, so we're doing this, I guess? I guess we're doing this. Hello, everyone. Welcome to uh, tier lists. Because apparently I decided to post 3 tier lists just so that I had something for like filler to post on my channel while I was not feeling very good. And then all 3 of those videos excelled ridiculously. um, the like lowest tier list basically did like 3 times better than like some of my best videos. One of them even got, I think it's like 500 views at this point. And so I guess we're doing more tier lists. I don't mind. I just don't know that there's a lot of like things that I have a big opinion on. Because like it's just, I don't know, I don't have a lot of opinion. Um Also, like, it's taken me like half an hour to even find another tier list that I was interested in doing. Um, Unfortunately, I don't know a lot of things like anime, manga, stuff like that. And when I started looking through the lists in like that category, I was just like, right, I know none of these. So but I did find the Zelda category, and one of the first things that was in there was the Legend of Zelda games tier list. And I went, you know what? I haven't sat down and like definitively like made a like an opinion on each Zelda game, how I feel about them, etc. And I pretty regularly do talk about the Zelda games and such on sort of on my channel. But I don't know that I've ever like sat down and really like debated, what I think of each Zelda game in turn. I'm kind of trying to put these in like order of release down here, but I don't know if this is right. But it's good enough for me. And so we will go through this list in this order. And I'll give some of my thoughts on each Zelda game. I'll list it between, is it S tier in that it's like super good? Is it D tier as in like don't even bother? Um, you know, what do I feel about, each of these games? So, I mean, I guess we have to start at the beginning with the original Legend of Zelda. And I have to say, I don't know if I would have gotten into Legend of Zelda if this had been like the original game I played. I will say that as far as Zelda 1 here goes, it's pretty on par, I would say, with a lot of the video games that I played back in the day of when I was young, right? Back in the early 90s. I know by then, Link to the Past would have been out. But I didn't have like consoles. I didn't have a computer. I had a Commodore 64 up until like freaking 1995, maybe 98. I don't remember because I don't remember if it was Windows 95 or Windows 98 that was on that computer. But yeah, we didn't really have like a legitimate like PC or anything. And so games of this like I don't want to say quality, but like, art style and such were kind of what I grew up on. Zelda 1 in particular is, I would say, decent enough that I can say that I like it. I definitely think it could be much better now. But for what it was, being the first game in the series, for being the time that it was released, obviously in the 1980s, 1989 or so? Maybe that, or was that Zelda 2? It was something like that. But like for the time that it was released and things like that, I would say that it's honestly pretty good for itself. And honestly, like who can forget the old Legend of Zelda NES commercial that was out. Let me see if I can get that actually. 1 second. Alright. I got it. I realized I also didn't have any like background music for it. So I added a hint of Ocarina of Time in the background. But yes, I did find the video that I was mentioning about the original Zelda rap. In fact, here, let me go ahead and do a quick pause on the background music just for a moment.
Did you see the latest Nintendo newsletter?
Whoa, nice graphics. I'd like to get my hands on that game.
You mean you haven't played it yet? We can
I
play it on
love
my
this
Nintendo Entertainment
commercial
System.
so much.
It's The Legend of Zelda, and it's really rad. Those creatures from Ganon are pretty bad. Octoroks, Tektites, Levers,
Immediately.
too. But with your help, our hero pulls through. Yeah, go Link. Yeah, get Zelda.
Awesome.
Intense.
The Nintendo Entertainment System. Your parents help you hook it up. The Legend of Zelda
Oh
sold
my
separately.
gosh. I love it so much though, dude. It's so hilarious. Like, I love that. It's so funny, and I love that every time. I think about that regularly, honestly. So I I don't know. I love that commercial. It's so good, dude. But yeah, I mean, who can hate a game that gave us an absolutely ridiculous video, commercial like that? Let's see. There is another commercial, but I want to wait because that is for another game. I'm gonna have to do some adjustments to the screen, to the YouTube like screen there that I had. But yes, Zelda 2 is the next on the list. The Adventure of Link. Funny how that's the only Zelda game that has like a number in it, which is I think that's hilarious. It's like Zelda 2. I mean, technically we did have Breath of the Wild 2, but also, that was a code name. That wasn't what it was going to be called. But I think that it's funny that this is the only, numbered game in the whole series. That said, Legend of Zelda 2 Adventure of Link. Where would I rank this? So I'm gonna say a couple of things that are gonna make it sound like I absolutely hate this game. And then you're going to be confused by where I rank this. So Zelda 2 has so many issues. The combat is ridiculously difficult, though pretty rewarding once you get it figured out, right? It's not like too bad. I would hearken Zelda 2's combat to Skyward Sword's combat. In that a lot of it was instead of there being like puzzles and things like that you had to solve, every enemy was a puzzle to solve in a way. You had to figure out how to fight each one and things. There's an experience system which is funky. It makes no sense. It is the first game to give us, well, no, I was gonna say like pieces of heart, but no, because heart containers were in the first one. I guess this did give us like magic and magic containers and things like that. But there's not like a lot of side content. Most of the quote-unquote side content is necessary for progression. It has a funky play style. It has a funky like overworld. Things like that. It's a very, very strange game. But if you look past the game's the game's biggest flaw, which is the whole life system, literally, I think that the only thing that really needs to change in Zelda 2 to make it a good game is removing the life system. As soon as you do that, the game becomes like 200% better. And honestly, as somebody who really enjoys the, hero going off on a journey to save a princess, kind of storyline, as being a girl who always kind of wanted a hero to come save her, wake her from the nightmare, and all of that. Honestly, I can't put this game any lower than A tier. If you were to remove the life system in the game, though, I would highly consider putting this up here in the S tier ranking, because I really, really enjoy this game. It is 100% the life system that kills the game. As such, every time that I've played it since, I did beat this game legitimately without, unlimited lives. But every time I have played this game, other than that once, I've always used an infinite lives cheat code. Because again, that's really the only thing in this game that is bad enough that I would consider it like a major deterrent, however you say the word. So I'm gonna put it at A tier, but really, with just one little cheat code, it goes all the way up into the S tier for me. Let's see. Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past, one of many people's favorite Zelda games, on the highest or way up here in S tier on a great many people's lists, I would imagine, based off of how I, hear, what people say about it and things on, from my perspective online. The combat sucks. Like, so badly in this game. It's definitely a step up from Zelda 1. I'll give it that. But the combat really sucks. Yes, it is the introduction of many items in Link's arsenal. And I am honestly willing to say that Zelda Link to the Past was, I think, the first Zelda game that I played that I knew was a Zelda game. Link's Awakening was actually the very first Zelda game I ever played, but I had no idea that it was a Legend of Zelda game at the time. I didn't know what Legend of Zelda was, I didn't know anything about it, but it was, Link's Awakening was, the first one I ever played. I had it on my Game Boy, and I never beat it. Originally, I should say, because obviously I have a full playthrough of both the remake and the DX version. But no, I owned the original Link's Awakening, not the DX version. So, but I didn't know that, it was part of a series back then. But getting back onto Link to the Past, of course. Again, combat sucks. I like that there's a number of side quests where you can get things like Pieces of Heart. This was the first game that introduced that concept. When it comes to the whole light world, dark world thing, I really dislike it. I don't think that it's handled well. There's too many requirements for going back and forth between the two worlds. You've got the Moon Pearl, which is the only thing that allows Link to go into this into the Dark World without being transformed into a bunny. A mechanic that is more or less put in place so that the first time that you go to the Dark World, you aren't just going wherever you want. It's a very linear game in terms of playstyle, which is interesting because it's after both Zelda 1 and Zelda 2, which are notorious for their more open-ended, open-world style. Link to the Past is a very linear game. Almost every dungeon requires an item from the previous dungeon in some way. You have to do dungeons 1, 2, 3, then you go to the Dark World, then you do Dark World dungeons 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, all in all, I hate to say this, but A Link to the Past is just not a great game. It has so many problems. And unlike The Adventure of Link, where I think the game is pretty good, but gets better if you add in a single cheat code, A Link to the Past just doesn't really have anything that, if you tweak one thing, it completely changes the game. All in all, it's really just not very good. The story is subpar at best. Not that Zelda 1 or 2 had much of a story. If we're talking, how much of a story the games have, this game obviously would be top tier because it has much more story than these two do. But it's just not great. It really isn't. On the other hand, while this game is surprisingly flawed, Link's Awakening, and I know that immediately I'm going to get a lot of crap because people are going to be like, well, you just have nostalgia because it's the first Zelda game you ever played, right? Keep in mind that I never got past the first dungeon in Link's Awakening when I played it initially. I didn't see the majority of Link's Awakening until I had beaten at least half of these other games. When it comes down to story, when it comes down to characters, when it comes down to how are all of these, how do all of these things mesh together and change the game as a whole and enhance it as a whole. Link's Awakening is just one of the best Legend of Zelda games. Like, straight up. It's not the best by a long shot. But Link's Awakening is a game I come back to quite regularly. The Koholint Island is one of my favorite locations in Zelda history. And it's just one of the best games, in my opinion. Also, I forgot to show you something when I was talking about Link to the Past. Let me grab that real fast. 1 second. Alright. This is what I meant to show when I was talking about A Link to the Past. This is the Japanese commercial for The Legend of Zelda, Link to the Past. And it is fantastic. I love this so much. Yes, that is a girl playing Link, which is great. I love it. If only that were the actual game. Oh my gosh, I love that so much. Again, that's one of my favorite commercials to watch because it's so freaking hilarious. I love it. Right, so moving on with our tier list, since we're already 24 minutes into this, and we've only gone through 4 games, good grief. Ocarina of Time! Woo! Look, it's everybody's favorite Zelda game! No, I'm not kidding. This game is garbage. Ocarina of Time is one of those games that I played, I super enjoyed, I really, really liked, going through it, playing it the first time, things like that. And then the replay happened. And I say this Mostly because replaying Ocarina of Time was kind of is what kind of shaped my opinion of it. A game's replayability, in my opinion, is a good 30, 35, maybe 40% of what I would say makes up how good a game is. Ocarina of Time has zero replayability. I have played Ocarina of Time many times. I dread it every time. The cutscenes are too long. There are too many of them. There is no story in the game at all. If there is a story, it is even so far below subpar that it's even lower than Link to the Past story. If you were to ask me, what's the story of Ocarina of Time? My answer would be, I have no idea. Because there really wasn't one. Which is funny considering how many cutscenes and things there are. You would think that a game that has as many cutscenes as it does would have a story and a plot. Every cutscene in Ocarina, like 90% of the cutscenes in Ocarina of Time are, hey, this is what happened. Not, this is what is happening. You know? It's always, back in the past, there was a great war. Back in the past, the goddesses created the Triforce. Back in the past, the goddesses created the Sacred Realm. There's so little going on then and there that they're constantly having to look to the past, which is funny because it's called Ocarina of Time, not Link to the Past. But they're constantly having to look backwards to find a reason for you to continue. And that does not create a story or a reason for me to continue now. That tells me the history, but that doesn't give me a story and a plot now. And quite literally every single Zelda game on this list did better than Ocarina of Time. So, with a, here and now storyline. If you want history, then by all means, Ocarina of Time has one of the richest histories in the game. But for the here and now, for what is the story now? There's basically nothing. There was a war. There was goddesses. There was the Triforce. What is now? Well, I guess Ganondorf took over. I guess. Not that he does anything in the entire game, but I guess he took over. Like, the biggest part of the game that has a here and now storyline is the 7 years that are skipped in between child and adult. If it had been the story of those 7 years, Ocarina of Time would be phenomenal. But the fact that the most story plot relevant point in the game is skipped, it's really, combat sucks in the game. Combat sucks. You're always waiting for an opening on an enemy to attack. It's the first big 3D Zelda, so it's like, oh, well, everything has to be fantastic. And so there's so many points where you're just like waiting, just sitting there waiting for something to happen. You open a chest, it takes 10 seconds to open a chest, you know. You open a door and you walk through it. You don't see what's ahead of you. You open the door, you walk through it, and the camera faces you as you like walk through. So instead of seeing what Link is seeing, you're waiting. You know, when you're fighting, you're waiting for an opening and then you attack. You know, there's so much just sitting there waiting for the game to tell you you can play it, that honestly, it sucks. And when you try to play it without waiting, when you try to just rush in and fight everything, the game either prevents you from doing so, such as Wolfos who jump backwards or they block, you know, Stalfos, which literally cannot be hurt unless they're in that state of, hey, there's an opening, or you have the Bigoron sword. And even then, I think it takes like 4 or 5 swings before you get one hit, you know. It's terrible. I hate it. Ocarina of Time is one of the worst Legend of Zelda games. Not the worst. One of the worst Legend of Zelda games. On the contrary, even though it was built off of Ocarina of Time's engine, Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask did a lot of things right that Majora's Mask did, Majora's Mask did things right that Ocarina of Time did completely wrong. You know, first off, I care about NPCs. There is not a single NPC in Ocarina of Time that I care about. Except maybe Saria slightly nowadays. I used to have the biggest crush on her when I was like 13. I'll admit. But even that, I'm like, there's just nothing there, you know? Majora's Mask, the NPCs are there. They are important. You literally cannot beat the game without them. You know, by the end of the game, at least if you've done all of the mask quests, you feel like you actually saved the world and care about the people that you saved. Combat is still pretty rough. But there's not a lot of sitting there and waiting like in Ocarina of Time. You know, you can shoot an arrow at a Bombchu and it explodes. You can throw the boomerangs from, you know, as Zora. You know, you can, you know, attack with, you know, your range of items, your range of masks, you know, things like that. The combat is just vastly enhanced from Ocarina of Time. Oh, and I should note, one of the biggest flaws that Ocarina of Time has is the massive overworld where there is literally nothing in it. Majora's Mask really doesn't have that. You walk out the gates of Clock Town, and no matter which of the 4 directions you go, there's something immediately. Whether it's a monster, whether it's tall grass to, you know, immediately cut, whether it's a hole somewhere. I'll say this much for exploration. Both of these games suck because their exploration is just terrible. But in the grand scope of things, Majora's Mask just did everything that Ocarina of Time did, but vastly, vastly better. Every dungeon is amazing. Every dungeon is fantastic. Ocarina of Time, there's maybe one dungeon that I actually like in it. And I couldn't even tell you which one that is off the top of my head. So apparently I don't like it that much. But I can tell you that I like all 4 dungeons in Majora's Mask. Especially the Stone Tower. The Stone Tower is my favorite. It has an impeccable story, the impeccable characters. All in all, it's one of the best Legend of Zelda games ever released. So, it is fantastic. And anybody who's played Ocarina of Time, I highly recommend playing Majora's Mask. And I know a lot of people's immediate reaction is going to be the time limit. Yes, the time limit is stressful, but honestly, the time limit doesn't matter that as much as it seems. Once you get the ability to slow down time for the first time, you start to notice just how slow time goes at that point. The 3DS remake actually upped the speed of slowed time because slowed time went so slow. And also, there's a myriad of checkpoints throughout the game. So, you can do something that takes you the first 3 days, and then you reach a spot, you go back in time, and then you're right where you left off. There's so many good things about it that Ocarina of Time just has none of. A Link to the Past has none of. Zelda 1, Zelda 2, as good a game as Zelda 2 is, it pales in comparison to how well Majora's Mask was handled. That said, the Oracle series. I know that Ages and Seasons are 2 separate games, but I'm going to group them together as one. And honestly, if you're looking at them individually, these games are absolutely worthy of both being dropped into the D tier. Because individually, each one of these games is long. Each one of these games is slow. Each one of these games has... it's the same combat as what's in Link's Awakening, but the mermaid suit in Ages, for example, really sucks. There's a myriad of, the freaking the Toke in Ages. Just about anything in Ages, honestly. The whole concept of going back and forth between time even, Same with Oracle of Seasons, though. The switching of seasons is such a pain. The journey is so long and nothing happens. Honestly, individually, these 2 games are terrible. And honestly, individually, I would not put them... I would honestly say that they are the worst Zelda games. Just straight up. Either of these games individually are the worst. That said, viewing them as a whole, if you were to cut about 4 dungeons out of each of the games, so that you have 8 dungeons and you go through both Ages and Seasons, that would be a vast improvement. Of course, not that you can do that, but I'm saying something like that would be a vast improvement. The story of Ages and Seasons is good, very clearly lacking the 3rd game. They're very clear, this was where the 3rd game should start, and there is no 3rd game, because we all know that there was a, 3rd game involved, because these were the mystical seed of courage, wisdom, and power games in Japan. But they ended up going down to just the mystical seed of power and the mystical seed of wisdom, which is Oracle of Seasons and Oracle of Ages as we got them. As a whole, the Oracle series is better than Ocarina of Time. And honestly, I would be willing to put the series as a whole up here in C tier. If I had to choose between these as individual games or these as a whole, that would completely change their rank. As a whole, they're a C tier. Individually, they're a D tier. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put one in C as the whole, and I'm going to put one in D as individual. So, this is, honestly, I'm going to do this because I like Din better. I like both Din and Nehru, I should note, but I like Din better. She was just sexier. I'm going to be honest. She was just sexier. But as a whole, if I had to choose between these two games, Seasons is the better game. Again, as a whole, the series is a C tier. But individually as games, I would say they're both... Sadly, Ocarina of Time is better than either of these games individually. That said, time for one of my favorite games, Wind Waker. And that tells you already that it's going to go high up on the list, of course, but still. Wind Waker was a fantastic game. When I first heard about Wind Waker, which was from my brother, who honestly is not a Zelda fan, he liked Ocarina of Time, and that's really been it. Ocarina of Time, Twilight Princess. I don't remember if he's even played Breath of the Wild, but those are like the three that he likes. But he did not like Wind Waker. When we first talked and I had first heard about Wind Waker, I was like, this sounds like a stupid game. You know, I looked at Wind Waker's art style and I went, this looks so bad. And then I ended up playing Phantom Hourglass, and I was going to write, like, a novel, you know, a fan fiction novel based off of Phantom Hourglass. And somebody asked, well, what about Wind Waker? And I'm like, I haven't played Wind Waker. And they're like, well, you should play Wind Waker. And so I said, fine, you know what? Before I do Phantom Hourglass, I'll do Wind Waker. So I went out and I got Wind Waker. And I ended up getting Twilight Princess first, but we'll get into that later. But I went out and got Wind Waker. I played through it. It was one of the best games I had ever played, honestly. I super enjoyed it. It was so much fun. The sailing gets old, but the HD remake definitely fixes that. But there's just so many good things about Wind Waker. The NPCs are fantastic. Medley is still one of my favorite characters in general. I absolutely ship Medley and Kamali, but then I also ship Medley and Link, so I mean, there's that. You know, but then I also ship Link and Tetra, so I mean, there's that. All in all, though, Wind Waker was just one of the best Zelda games out there. And so I'm going to put it in the A tier. And the reason I'm putting it in A and not S is because I'm limiting S to only, like, the top 3 best Zelda games, in my opinion. Everything below that is A or below. Because if I were to let the games that I think are amazing all be in S tier, about 3/4 of this list would end up in S tier. Both of these would be in S tier. This would be in S tier, you know. But I'm limiting this to only 3 games, and I already know what the third one is. And so, you know, As great of a game as Wind Waker is, both Majora's Mask and Link's Awakening absolutely beat Wind Waker out. And Link's Awakening is at the bottom of the S tier list, with Majora's Mask being in the middle, which of course tells you that there's a game before Majora's Mask. So, that said, again, going back to the whole idea of only putting 3 things in S tier, Minish Cap is a game that I would put in S tier if I wasn't only limiting it to 3. Minish Cap was an amazing game. I loved the hell out of it. I loved the mechanic of going mini. I loved the mechanic of the kinstones. I was really annoyed when I found out that you can soft lock yourself out of the kinstones. Because NPCs move around and certain kinstone trades become unavailable after certain dungeons, because I very much wanted to do the kinstone mechanic. The kinstone mechanic was one of my favorite things. The design of the game was one of my favorite things. I loved Eslo. I loved Vadi. In fact, after I played Minish Cap, I role-played as Vati for a year after the game, after I played the game, because I loved Vati. Vati was such a cool villain, and just everything about Minish Cap was just fantastic. And so I'm going to go ahead and put it up here in A tier. And I'm putting it after Wind Waker, but before Adventure of Link. That said, what can be said about Four Swords? No, literally, what can be said about Four Swords? There is no game here. It's... Come on. Thank you. There is no game. There's a bunch of levels that you go through. And I guess that there's bosses that you fight. Not that those bosses really feel any different from anything else. It's an absolute pain to get 4 Game Boy Advances, hook them all up together, and then find 3 other players to play with you that actually, want to play the game and aren't just playing because it's something to do. I played through all of Four Sword after buying 2 copies of A Link to the Past, 2 Game Boy Advances. I have 4 GBAs, by the way. But I bought 2 Game Boy Advances. I bought 2 copies of ALTTP/Four Sword. It left no impression on me, honestly. It really didn't. There just wasn't a game there. And I know that the whole point of it wasn't that Four Swords was a game in its own right. It was A Link to the Past that they released with extra multiplayer content. And so, under that scope, it accomplished what it was trying to do. And because it accomplished what it was trying to do, I have to rank it better than Ocarina of Time. Because I don't even think Ocarina of Time accomplished what it was trying to do. I really don't. I really don't. And then we get to Twilight Princess. Once again, one of the best Legend of Zelda games that they ever released. It's dated. The art style is pretty meh nowadays. If I had to pick between the Wind Waker art style and the Twilight Princess art style, I would pick the Wind Waker's art style because it's cuter, it's more fun, and it's not dark and gritty and trying to be like top edge technology graphic, you know? I just think that the more realistic games become, the less they age well. You know, the less well they age. And unfortunately, that's Twilight Princess's biggest issue is it wanted to be the nitty-gritty, the dark, the, you know, Ocarina of Time, etc. of the GameCube era, which was what they were going for, of course. Because, of course, it was made after the big backlash from Wind Waker's art style. But it tried to be the Ocarina of Time of the GameCube. And I'll note, it succeeded in that vastly better than Ocarina of Time did. On the other hand, it's just not as good as Minish Cap or Wind Waker. You know, if I had to choose between these 4 games, Wind Waker would be at the top. Followed by Minish Cap, Twilight Princess, Adventure of Link. And you can see why, like, back in Adventure of Link, I was like, I would put this in S tier, you know. If I wasn't limiting S tier to just 3 games, all of this and this would all be in the S tier. I think they're that good. So don't think that just because I'm putting Twilight Princess in A tier, oh, Serene must hate the game. No. Like, it is absolutely one of the best Legend of Zelda games out there. I love this game. It's just trying too hard to be the Ocarina of Time of the GameCube. And unfortunately, that's what I didn't like about Ocarina of Time. So, Four Sword Adventures. I mean, is there even a game here again? This game is a party game. It is not a go through an adventure, play through a story, you know, so on game. It can be played that way, but it's very much designed under the style of you play through the whole game on single player. You get 3 friends to come together and join you so that you have 4 people. And then you just all get together and play the battle mode because there really just isn't anything in the game that feels like it needs there to be 4 players. And I get that that's the point. You know, it's supposed to be the single-player version of a multiplayer game. And for that, it works well. The problem is that they sacrificed the single-player experience to add a multiplayer experience. And so I'm going to go ahead and put that at the very bottom of the C tier list. Now, Phantom Hourglass and Spirit Tracks come into play at this point. As many of you know, I am currently playing Spirit Tracks on the channel, and I am constantly talking about how much I love the game. Phantom Hourglass was the game Phantom Hourglass was the game that had to exist in order for Spirit Tracks to be as good as it was. If Phantom Hourglass hadn't existed, everything that is in Spirit Tracks would have been the way it was in Phantom Hourglass. And unfortunately, that's really not great. The Temple of the Ocean King is a horrendous freaking dungeon that gets more annoying as you go deeper in. It becomes more of a chore to get further into the game. It becomes an absolute pain to even, like, play by the end of the game. But the one thing it does have going for it is the characters, specifically Oshus and Linebeck. And whatever Linebeck's girlfriend slash rival slash whatever she was is. Those three characters really make up a lot of the game. And the final fight where you have to fight Linebeck or, Bellum being controlled, your Linebeck being controlled by Bellum, like, that gave me emotions. Because even though you are fighting Bellum in that form, it really didn't feel like you were fighting Bellum. It felt like you were fighting Linebeck. A character that you knew, a character that you had grown to love, a character that you were completely engrossed by the end of the game. And he becomes the main villain, basically. And I loved everything about that. That said, I would honestly say that this is the best of the C-tier games. That said, Spirit Tracks is vastly better by every account. The Spirit Tower is much easier to get around. The train is much more fun to pilot than the boat was, where you just drew a line and then you were just like, okay, see you in 5 minutes. Spirit Tracks requires you to think about where you're going, to watch the tracks and make sure you don't run into another train. You can't just draw a line and then say, okay, I'll look at the game again in 5 minutes when I should be there. Climbing the Spirit Tower is vastly better than climbing down the Ocean King's Temple. The story is on par with Phantom Hourglasses, which is to say it's not amazing. In fact, I'm pretty sure that they forgot what the plot was until the end of the game, because after you encounter Maladus the first time at the beginning, you don't encounter him again until the end of the game. And then they're just like, oh yeah, all of this work that you've done to restore the Spirit Tracks, to keep Maladus sealed away, none of that mattered. Like, it legitimately feels like they forgot what the plot was. And unfortunately, that makes it so I can't give it a very high spot. However, I am willing to put it at the bottom of the B tier. It is higher than Phantom Hourglass, which is at the top of C, which means that it has to be in B. So, what can be said about Skyward Sword? Oh my God, Skyward Sword, you were the chosen one, Skyward Sword. Graphically, this is one of the best Legend of Zelda games. It looks like it is what Ocarina of Time was meant to be back in the day. If you were to look at Ocarina of Time with the eyes of, an 8-year-old playing a 3D game for the first time, and then you were to look at Skyward Sword nowadays, or rather at the time of its release, Skyward Sword feels like they took Ocarina of Time's graphics and said, let's modernize. And for that, I think the game is great. The combat is decent. The combat, as I mentioned, is akin to Adventure of Link. Everything is a puzzle. Everything requires you to think on your toes. And for that, I vastly enjoyed it. Demise is completely forgettable. Girahim is a decent villain. Honestly, had it been Girahim and not Demise, the game would be 2 times, better. Because Girahim was just that much more of a villain than Demise was. Demise pops up at the end of the game, says, "Come challenge me," and then you kick his ass, and that's the end of the game. There's nothing to him, you know? And I know people can be like, well, what about the imprisoned? I know they're supposed to be the same creature, but I just can't see them as being the same. The imprisoned is horrible. I feel like they were forced to bring the imprisoned into Hyrule Warriors because he does not work in Hyrule Warriors. He didn't even work in freaking Skyward Sword. I almost said Spirit Tracks. He didn't even work in Skyward Sword, let alone work in, a hack and slash, run around, kill everything game. And if I were to ignore the imprisoned, if I was to ignore the 30 times that you are required to backtrack to the same area and solve essentially the same set of puzzles, I would honestly say Skyward Sword could be one of the best Zeldas. Unfortunately, you have to backtrack so much, and not even just for side content, for the main content. You go to each of the 3 zones 6 different times and have to solve basically the same set of puzzles each time to get to the next dungeon. It's there's literally a point where the dungeon is right there. All you needed was the item that you got from the last dungeon, but they drop you into the region and they force you to go through a stealth section and get all your items and all of this other garbage, and then literally then walk into the next room and there's the dungeon. It is so bad. There's so much backtracking. There is so much garbage. They clearly looked at the game when it was nearly complete and said, this is a 10-hour game. What can we do to make it 40 hours? And then they did that. I mean, we know that Skyward Sword was delayed 3 times, so it wouldn't surprise me if that's actually what they did. Because it feels like that. It feels like there is just stuff shoehorned in, and it sucks. It really, really sucks. The motion controls are fantastic. The combat is fantastic. All of the bosses are memorable and fantastic. It's the in-between, and unfortunately the in-between is about 30 hours worth of content. And unfortunately, that means that I have to put it below A Link to the Past. In fact, I'm going to put it below the Oracle series because, honestly, even the Oracle series didn't make you backtrack and go through as much garbage as Skyward Sword did. If I was going based purely off of story, purely off of combat, any of those things that Skyward Sword excelled at, Skyward Sword would absolutely be in S tier, possibly be even the number 1 or number 2. But that's 10 hour, all of the good stuff is 10 hours of a 40-hour game. And it's the other 30 hours of the game that sucks. Link Between Worlds. What can be said about this garbage? I know a lot of people are going to get upset, but listen to my viewpoint. A Link to the Past is in C tier because of all of the things that I listed off, pointing out. A Link to the Past does nothing to improve any of that. A Link to the Past, or A Link Between Worlds, is a remake of A Link to the Past. And I know immediately a lot of people are immediately going to be down in the comments going, it's not a remake of A Link to the Past. It's a whole different game. No. Link Between Worlds is a remake of A Link to the Past. It's the same dungeons. It's the same bosses. It's the light world and dark world. It is everything that A Link to the Past was. But with bonus extra garbage content and nothing that improves anything that A Link to the Past had. You had the Maiamais, which were an absolute pain. You had the rental system, which was an absolute pain. You had you technically, yes, you did have the ability to do the dungeons in any order, which was technically an improvement over A Link to the Past. But the way they did it was inferior to a linear game. Everything about A Link Between Worlds that was not the same as A Link to the Past was inferior. Beyond that, it was literally just a remake of A Link to the Past. And I know that it was a remake to A Link to the Past. I know that the idea started with, we want to remake A Link to the Past. They remade the game, and then Shigeru Miyamoto said, well, what if we do something a little bit different? And so then they steered it in a different direction. It started as a remake of A Link to the Past. It will always be, in my mind, a remake to A Link to the Past. And unfortunately, as good as remakes usually are, everything that they added to A Link Between Worlds makes it inferior to A Link to the Past. And so, it's going to go into D tier below Ocarina of Time. Which leaves us with one game, and you can probably already guess where it's going. The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. The first open world game that I have ever played where I enjoyed there being an open world. I have played Morrowind. I have played Skyrim. I have played Oblivion. That's three of the 5 Elder Scrolls games. Granted, I've never played any other open world games. I couldn't even think of any other open world games that I could even try to play. I guess Elden Ring, but I already know that I hate that game. So, I don't even have to play it to know that I hate that game. It's just, Breath of the Wild is the first open world game that I actually enjoyed playing. And not only that, I loved all of the little things in the world that were fun. Even to this day, I still come back to Breath of the Wild regularly. Heck, I was going to do a whole Breath of the Wild series with the Linkle 3.0 mod, except that this computer can't run it. Otherwise, that would be up on my channel right now, you know? And yes, Breath of the Wild story was subpar at best. You know? Yes, the dungeons weren't really the standard Zelda dungeon. But also, that was the point. And I think that's what a lot of people don't realize. You know, the point was the dungeons were not supposed to be standard Zelda dungeons. They were supposed to be different. They were supposed to be something new. And every time anybody compares it to other Zelda games, they're always talking about how it compares to other Zelda dungeons. You cannot do that, because that is not the point. The point is that they're a new thing. They're a completely different thing. All you can do when comparing its dungeons is compare them to how you feel you would handle the same thing. You know, you can compare them to each other, but you can't compare Ocarina of Time's dungeons to Breath of the Wild's dungeons, because Breath of the Wild's dungeons are not meant to be a copy-paste of Ocarina of Time like every game since Ocarina of Time. The dungeons are supposed to be different. The gameplay is supposed to be different. And honestly, for what it was trying to accomplish, it accomplished better than almost every other Zelda game. Just straight up. And so, yes, I am putting Breath of the Wild at the top of the S tier list, because that's just what it's meant to be. It is not meant to copy Ocarina of Time. And I am so thankful for that, and so fearful that because of how Breath of the Wild was received, that Tears of the Kingdom is just going to go back to replicating Ocarina of Time for the 20th time. I really hope not, because I'm really, really tired of going through the Ocarina of Time again and again and again and again. So tired of fire, forest, water, shadow, spirit. You know, I want something different. I want the Zelda series to excel. I want Legend of Zelda to look at Ocarina of Time and the fact that it has been copying itself over and over again and say, you know what? We're not going to do that anymore. And that's what Breath of the Wild did, and I hope that they continue to do that, because I'm just so freaking tired of playing Ocarina of Time again and again and again with a new name. So this has been my Zelda Games tier list. I hope you enjoyed. Feel free to subscribe if you did. Leave a comment down below about what you thought of my tier list. I already know the main comment is going to be, Serene, why you put Ocarina of Time in the D rank? It should be in the S rank at the first slot. No. No. Absolutely not. No. Alright. With that, you can come on out and hang out with us and chat in Discord if you would like, along with helping to support the channel via Patreon. Both of those are in the description below. And with that, I'll see you all next time. See you later.